Hey guys, CreamCrazy here, and I'm not usually my joyful self, but here is a wrestling rant. But this is a subject I wasn't afraid of tackling. I wasn't sure about tackling this subject, because death is a subject that in any facet of life that we have is something that is very difficult to talk about, because it's understandably hard to talk about something which is no longer there. It's difficult to come to terms with the idea that whatever we used to see or talk to, whomever we used to see and talk to, is no longer there for us to enable the conversation. And the thing is, even though death is in every single part of our lives, not just in human terms, but from the meat we eat, to the trees that were cut down, to make the cardboard and paper that we write and package things on, to the skin of certain animals that we sit on, or that we wear. It's one of those things where death is around us all the time, and when it hits you somewhere hard, it's difficult to really get to terms with it. And pro wrestling has had a very unfortunate history that it's entertained so many, and yet caused so much tragedy all in one fell swoop. And looking at the subject of pro wrestling in the genre of death and the area of where it sits, it's difficult to really comprehend just how much death there has been in this industry that we know and love. To many, and has many a showcase to many people, death can be something that can easily shy you away from something, or it can bring you closer to it. Because you feel at one with the amount of people who feel the same sorrow you do. However, the one thing about this subject that gets me is just looking at how much death there has been. I haven't done any calculations, but I know it's upwards of nearly 300 plus. I'm probably over-exaggerating, but the amount of wrestlers who have died since the 1980s is, like good Mike Work said, it's unfathomable that there's that much. And I always wonder to myself, what the hell caused all this? People would say the addiction to steroids would do it, but of course that's not the only thing that can kill a person in this business. Technically anything can kill anyone, but when you look at what can kill someone in this business, it's frightening. I mean, you have broken bones all over the place, which is a start. You have concussion diseases which cause mental psychotic breakdowns, a la Chris Benoit. You have the in-ring move you're doing could break your neck and cause you to die straight there. Look at one wrestler who got paralyzed from it. Look at Mitsuharu Misawa, who died from a German suplex going wrong like that. And even you look at the steroid abuse I've already mentioned. You look at people getting murdered over problems, a la Bruiser Brody. You have car accidents. You have drink and alcohol abuse. You have massive debt and homelessness in one or two cases which could have caused it. I mean, you can even get infections from canvas and ring dust, which causes your body to get infected, and if not treated enough, you could suffer a similar fate with problems. And it's just, I look at this, I love professional wrestling, but when I look at just how much death there is in it, and how often, I mean, it's not as often nowadays, but about 5 or 6 years ago, we wouldn't go at least a month, or even 2 or 3 weeks without hearing of a wrestling-related death. And it just takes me aback to think, this business has given so much, yet taken so much as well. And I honestly wonder how, I understand in a way, I don't understand how it manages to get to this point, that we've gotten to this point now, where the safety measures are in place, but this cloud is never going to go away. I mean, sure, the times of steroids are gone. The times of concussion-related injury are now being dealt with. If you have an alcohol problem, it's difficult and understandably hard to get away from it, but there is a company of people who can help you with this stuff. And people often have to realise, and I think a lot of people sometimes don't get this, is that even with everything, every safeguard in position, from a wellness policy to a close friend network to whatever happens, it is very difficult to shed pro wrestling of its dark coat, because it's always going to be there, no matter what we look at it. And it's kind of gotten me in the perception where, even with all the safeguard in place, what is to stop anything from happening again? Pro wrestling is full of stories that have ended wrong. Chris Candido, I mean, he came back from a career problem and came in ready to build his career back up again. He then suffers an injury in the ring, which then gets infected and dies after a match. And you wonder, how can this happen? How can anything happen? I mean, with all the risks that professional wrestlers take, like any sportsman, from footballers who can suffer from heart trauma from over-exercising, which causes too much blood to pump through, causing a heart attack. When you've got racing drivers who, even with their safety measures, are repeatedly in danger of anything going wrong. And I always am afraid, whenever I'm watching an F1 race, that anything is going to happen, where someone's brake is going to catastrophically fail down the straight in Abu Dhabi, which causes them to plough into a tyre-based concrete wall and then they die. Same thing coming out of the tunnel in Monte Carlo and Monaco. I mean, pro wrestling has had more death attached to it than anything I can ever think of, apart from terrorism and a few other things. But when it comes to sport, I've never seen a place where there was so much death in it. And like I said, it's hard for me to comprehend, because I can't believe it has this much. Even boxing and MMA doesn't have anything like this. Boxing may have the obvious hitting someone in the head so hard that their brain bleeds out. I mean, that's rare. It's difficult for a guy in a boxing ring to die. It's all over the place for a wrestler to die in so many different ways. And maybe what they do and the lifestyle they have to lead over the years causes them problems, because they have to deal with the pain. And I understand from what Rico has told me and the pain he's suffering through in his in-ring career, that not being able to do wrestling anymore with injuries that you have is a problem. Not being able to quell the pain that you have when other people are able to do things without having problems is a very massive thing. But when you look at how much death comes from this business, it just makes you think to yourself that it shouldn't be like this. But the steroids obviously would have caused problems. If people wanted to look big to get to the place they are and look at the part to make themselves a star, and then realise it helps them with the pain, it then causes them problems. And inevitably, in many cases, it makes them kill themselves with it. To see so many young wrestlers taken out in their prime due to this kind of thing, I mean, it just baffles the mind that when people are continuously told, don't go after the drugs in this business, don't take this stuff, and yet they still do, because it's the only way to relieve the pain, because emotional pain is easy to get rid of in a lot of ways. It takes time, but it's doable. Physical pain is something that I can say from my own personal experiences, it is very difficult to shed, and the impact from it is very difficult to shed. And I mean, there's no way of safeguarding what pro wrestlers do in the ring as more than they have done already. You can't make a scripted fight even more scripted and even more safe for the sake of it. People are going to take risks to entertain us. That's their job. But knowing the consequences of this, to see people like Droz paralyzed, to see people like Chris Candido and Mitsuharu Misawa die in the ring, to see Owen Hart even, I would say, die in the ring, to see people have such effect of this business on them over time that they commit the most horrible act in our moral system, a la Chris Benoit. You know, it's one of those things where you can't believe you've seen this much there. And death is, for pro wrestling fans, it's almost become just a norm now. We still feel immensely saddened and shocked by it, but we expect it, because it's just what has happened over time. We don't look at it and say, oh, things need to be changed, because we don't really know what else there is needed to be changed. We don't want to ruin the excitement of what we see by making the fights even more scripted than they are already. We don't want to see them continuously being monitored and have their ability to do what they can and will in normal life completely shut down because people are afraid of them going overboard. You know, we don't want to mollycoddle these guys and these professionals. And the problem is that death is natural anyway. in some cases, I mean, MVP, with his heart condition that the WWE spotted in the wellness policy, he could have easily died in the middle of the ring from that if it wasn't for that kind of medical help. And it's hard to believe that you could have easily just seen him in there and boom, he's dead, and the show cuts and we don't know what the hell is going on. Jerry Lawler's heart attack, experiencing that on air was just horrifying. Because again, death is around any corner, but in pro wrestling, it is heightened. Death is almost anywhere you look, from the ghosts of wrestlers on DVDs that you have, all the way through to the perception that any of these people in this ring or backstage right now could croak, and you would know about it, and you would know how, and you would feel saddened because another person has been taken in the line of pro wrestling. And like I said earlier, I have not seen a sport riddled with this. I mean, you could look at horse racing and say the euthanizing of horses after they fall means that horse racing has a plethora of death and graveyard systems around it. But the amount of death and accidents waiting to happen that stigmatizes around pro wrestling is one of the reasons why people have had to change the focus. You know, the steroid-related deaths and the Benoit murder-suicide and all the stuff led to WWE realise how much negative press this was causing. That every time a wrestler died, it was always pointed back at them. Whenever a wrestler gets really badly injured, the finger points back at them. Hearing about, I should say, because I wasn't there for it, but hearing Lionheart pretty much breaking his neck and nearly getting paralysed by a botched Styles clash at a British indie show a week or two ago makes you think to yourself, wow, AJ Styles, what the hell were you thinking there? I mean, people can proportion blame onto anyone in regards to this subject, that death is... This is the thing, people often put blame on people in death. It's part of the grieving process for anything. We always try and say, well, what if he didn't take steroids, which made him do this? What if he didn't take all these chair shots to the skull? What if they didn't have to take all these high-risk moves? And we could blame the WWE with their negligence. You could blame people for doing what they had to do with certain weapons being introduced. You can blame whoever made the move. I mean, some people blame Dynamite Kid or Holly Race for inventing or using that swan dive headbutt, which enabled the Benoit head to get messed up, which then inevitably caused what happened. And some people even go as far to say the industry fails people because they don't care about them enough. The wrestling industry cares about their performers, about their contracted workers, about their wrestlers more than anything else. Because they care about the fans, but they care about the people who make the entertainment and the fans show up. You know? And the fact that every single way you look, any wrestler in a locker room or any situation in any company has had death hit them. Whether it be from an idol they've worshipped, from a person they have wrestled with, from a friend of theirs, to a close relation. To see all that, wrestling is full of it, and it's hard to comprehend, as I keep saying, that this is how it is. That pro wrestling is full of this negative subject that, again, I don't normally mention a lot of death. I don't want to focus on the negative. And we focus on the negatives in pro wrestling when it comes to analysing it. But this is the biggest negative of them all. Every time we look at a DVD, at a WWE Network pay-per-view on archive, every time we look at an action figure of ours, a calendar, a program, or a picture we've taken, that person may no longer be there, and it could be sooner than we originally would have ever thought possible. I mean, you could have easily have seen Paul Bearer at his last appearance and then find out he dies days later. You think, wow, what the hell? I mean, this is the thing that kind of gets me, is that like I've said, pro wrestling is surrounded with death. It feels like there's a Grim Reaper always hanging over, but no matter what we do, it'll always be there. We can protect them as much as we want, but it's never going to go away. Formula 1 has not had a racing fatality since 1994, even with a few martial fatalities. Like I've said earlier, there is always that overbearing idea that it could eventually happen again. There is no way of denying it. And in pro wrestling, with the culture that has been changed but still somehow exists, it is difficult to say we are free of it. WWE is in a position where they are the cleanest they've ever been in terms of drugs, in terms of lifestyles, in terms of people, and yet I'm always thinking to myself, one day something is going to happen to someone here. Something could eventually happen. Something could go wrong. Something could happen. And then everything, once again, in WWE's pretty little universe, could be turned upside down. And I think a lot of times, though, pro wrestling fans, they don't want to look at this side of this. They don't want to look at this side and just look at the positives. They don't want to look at this because it's such a daunting thing to grasp that a person they saw on television, a person they talked to at events, a person they supported and gave part of their life for is no longer around. They don't want to focus on that construct. And they end up focusing on the positives of what they gave and feel happy about it. And in the case of the Chris Benoit scenario, people do the same because they, even though they comprehend what he did, they don't want to focus on what he did. And that's primarily where I stand on it, personally. I don't want to think about what happened. I should, because it's a thing you can't ignore. But it's easier to think of the good times, because it makes it easier. And that's what anyone in a grief-stricken position, it makes it so much easier to remember the good times. But like I said, with pro wrestling, you may try, but that circle of death is always there. Whether it's looking at lists of wrestlers who have died, whether it's reading obituaries, whether it's looking at news sites which report it, and looking at past footage, it's there all the time. And even if we try and focus on so many positives, it cannot be denied that the Grim Reaper is hanging over every single wrestler, knowing, I've taken your friends. What's to say I can't take you as well? And it's really just incredible in a negative way just how much death has impacted this industry. That wrestlers can become friends of other wrestlers, and then one of them dies, then the other can follow soon after. When any situation could cause death. Any situation they do could cause death. I mean, like I've said, you can be in the ring, you can die. You can be at home, guzzling down pills or drink, and you can die. You can even, like in the case of Bruiser Brody, like I mentioned, be in the back and get shanked with a knife and die. There's just so much that I just can't seem to grasp, that death in this business is so prominent in it that it's very difficult to ignore. And I'm never going to fully understand this, and this isn't really a rant per se, but death is never going to stop in the scope of things. But I'm just hoping we can go an extended period as fans, as people who respect this industry, without having to hear something like this. Because it's just really hard to believe. I mean, we've heard of Mae Young's death. Recently we've had Viscera also. I mean, we've also had Billy Robinson, British wrestler, go down too. And you think about that, that's 3 deaths within a month. And you think, professional wrestling just needs a time where this doesn't happen. But of course, we know that isn't going to happen. We know that isn't going to be as easy to implement, because the world will do whatever it can and will do whatever it has to do. Nature will call and time will ring up on so many people. I mean, Paul Bearer, I would have loved to have seen him induct himself into the Hall of Fame. But unfortunately that ain't going to happen. I mean, to be honest with you, we have been graced a few times with seeing wrestlers who we've known are on the brink of death come back and keep their lives going for a bit longer. Jake the Snake Roberts and Scott Hall being prime examples of that. They, in a way, have cheated death more times than I can think, but they're still going. But that's what makes their stories awesome, that they managed to combat against it. Scott Hall, impressively, more so. He was pretty much at death's door more times than I can count. Billy Graham, the same. With all the bouts of pneumonia that he's had, I'm surprised he hasn't croaked either. But honestly, why should I be in this position? Why should I be happy in knowing these people have survived when I know eventually it will eventually kick them again, and they may not get back up this time? Because this is the thing. With pro wrestling, I can look at every single person in the industry and say, it's possible you're probably going to die. We don't know when, but it's going to happen at some point. Even the same is Hangover Vinnie Mac. Every time he gets a year older, we're always saying, who's going to take over WWE? Who's going to overtake Vince McMahon and run this company? Who is going to take those ginormous shoes and fill them? And that's the biggest thing of them all. At the top of the biggest company, at the top of the biggest wrestling organization in the world, we are focusing and trying to contemplate the idea of losing Vincent Kennedy McMahon. And that's mostly because he's nearly 70. He's 68 years old. And we are contemplating a future without him daily. We're contemplating a future without a Stone Cold in this world, a Shawn Michaels, an Undertaker in this world. We're contemplating all of the legends who have come past us, and we're always contemplating on how they're doing and whether they're going to be able to stick it through. The wrestlers like Scott Hall, like Jake the Snake Roberts, like Billy Graham, like I would say even Sonny, we're always hoping that they don't die. If they're not wrestling, we're either checking on their lives, observing it, and then hoping they don't croak. And that's just a really sad way to be in a fandom. You know, I mean, we love pro wrestling, but to be surrounded by that all the time is just ridiculous. It's baffling. And like I've said, it just is hard to comprehend in every stretch that something like this that causes us so much joy can fill us with such anger and hatred and sadness because of what death has done to it. Death has taken pro wrestling and always given you that what if, that questioning scenario, because it's always existing. And I haven't seen it anywhere else as much as this. And it's just... oh my god, I am speaking about it and I'm almost being left speechless here. And that says a lot. And honestly, I'm going to end with this statement here. We cannot cheat death forever. But the pro wrestling business needs to look at itself and say, we need to have a month, 2 months, 3 months maybe, and hope the world doesn't give us a middle finger and takes another one of our friends. Because the wrestling business has been surrounded with death for decades now, and it creates a real somber picture whenever you look at it. We need to look at this and, okay, we can try and look at the good all we can, but the fact of the matter is it'll always stare us in the face. It'll always stare us in the face, and this is an inevitability that we can't stop. But the one thing we can hope for is that the world doesn't remind us again that this industry, no matter how good it is always ready and willing to have one or two be let go through the vices of death. I have been Cream Crazy. You've been people listening. This has been a wrestling rant on the subject of death in pro wrestling, and I will see you guys next time. Cheers.